And
Thanks,
Angie,
guys.
Thank you.
welcome. Hey, welcome back to F.A.C.E, Angie.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm on time today.
Yeah.
So
Oh, great. And I'm going to share my screen
yeah.
because I want to talk about what's been happening in the grain market, and uh, you know, I would ask you about your genesis and how you ended up being involved in the grain market, but it's obvious, right? You grew up on one
Yeah, I grew up on a
farm.
potato farm. Yep, grew up on a
Okay.
potato farm when I was younger, but went to school to be a teacher. So ended up by luck, I guess. The universe knows or something of that nature. Maybe it doesn't. I have no idea. But yeah, I've been here now for 16 and a half years and couldn't be in a more I just love it. I love working in agriculture, and it's definitely
Yeah.
been a fun last year or so. Definitely have whiplash. So here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I think it was either a tweet or something else that you wrote, and maybe you could explain it to me. You talked about how, producers have a hard time during low prices. And I'm
Mhm.
assuming that's because they don't have a uh, they have a big crop and they're not getting the prices that they would want or need
Mhm.
to be more profitable. But I have a hard time understanding why and you could explain this to us, that you said it's just as difficult with high prices. And is
Yeah.
that because they have a short crop or don't know where to hedge? I would
Yeah.
think that they'd all be doing cartwheels with the
Right.
prices that they're getting for grains.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest conundrums or the biggest dichotomies in agriculture for sure as a producer is you always want these high prices and you're always an optimist. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't be a farmer if you were optimistic because you're reliant upon Mother Nature and you have all of these other things that are going on, that impact your ability to be successful. But you're also a pessimist. You always want to look for what the best outlook is going to be, but you also have to be aware of how the things could go wrong. And so I think as a farmer in general, in the higher market time periods, especially after the stretch that we went through. So you don't have to spend much time looking at charts to realize that, since about 2013, 2014, you've really wanted to be aggressive early. You wanted to sell any rallies that developed. Anytime you could get above $4 on corn, above $10 on beans, above $5.50 towards $6 on wheat. As a farmer, you wanted to be an aggressive seller. And so one of the hardest parts about this particular rally that we've seen is just that a year ago, we're looking at the likelihood of basically drowning in supply. The USDA had put out a 3.2 billion bushel corn projection, carry out projection. They were expecting, well over a 500 million bushel of soybeans. And we really were of a mindset to where we were going to reset to where things were, when I started in the industry, when I started in 2005,
$4 or $5 beans.
yeah, my first day on the job was to call farmers and say, hey, I'll give you $1.80 picked up for your corn. And most of them were like, honey, you get me 2.25, I'll sell you the bin. You know what I mean? And so that's the
Yeah.
world in which, we lived. And then we had ethanol, and then we had China, and we had the inflation trade, and all of these things really kind of culminated to this huge apex in price, 2012 time period. And since then, down to last year, we really had kind of struggled with what farmers needed to do. Finally get all of this sort of organizational thinking and in approaching the farm as a business and getting these folks to really kind of recognize the importance of early contracting and being somewhat aggressive at those price points that we talked about before, and then we had COVID hit and we were trying to figure out how we were going to manage with sub $3 corn for a lot of folks, sub $8 beans. And then all of a sudden, flash forward 8-10 months, and we're trading $7.50 corn, and we're trading $7 wheat, and we're trading $16-17 beans. And the hardest part for a lot of these producers is they didn't have the bushels left to take advantage. And so you could say, yeah, you
So
can
they
trade
were
options.
hedged. They were all
They were
hedged
hedged early.
at
Yeah.
low. Okay, now I understand.
Lower values.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And the harder part in that is you're hedged at a lower value. And of course, when the market structure goes up, and all commodities go up because inputs for crops are basically could be considered, as a class of commodities, so to speak. They're a good. they're something that you have to, get your hands on. And we saw fertilizer go up. We've seen chemicals go up. We've seen supply disruptions happen. That's increased costs of inputs, and so one of the harder parts in all of that is they
Lower
not only
dollar.
did they sell perhaps too early. Yeah. The lower dollars is removed some buying power. You know what I mean? And so your margin on both sides are getting squeezed. And for some, once you actually sit down and look at the numbers, depending upon how they yield this year, and the size of the crop that they produce. For some, they may find themselves making less on the net side of things than what they were when we were trading $3.50 corn.
Yeah, that would aggravate me. That would be it's the opportunity costs that's driving them crazy then.
Yeah, and the hardest part is that a lot of times we in the industry you'll kind of advise a grower, all right, we'll sell cash and spend some money on a call. But the last 8 years, any money that was spent on calls really kind of, they expired worthless, as options mostly do. And so this time you had a lot of customers also just sitting kind of flat-footed, like, I don't believe it. I don't trust that China is
it doesn't
long-term.
work. It's a waste of money, that call.
Yeah, and so
until it isn't.
And so, exactly.
That's what people are saying in the stock market right now, Angie. It's a waste of money to hedge.
It's always too expensive, until it isn't too expensive, and then you wish you would have. And
we don't buy fire insurance for our house hoping that the house catches a fire.
And I've always said that about options. You really kind of do want your options, to a certain extent to expire worthless. Obviously, you don't want to continue to waste money, especially when margins are tight. But so this year has been, in the 16 years that I've done this, you know what I mean? And we've been down this road a few times. And my first year of managing the elevators solo was 2012 when we had the drought. So I've been down some pretty bumpy roads, but this one's definitely been one of the bumpiest, I guess. And so now we're waiting to see what production's going to look like, what demand's going to look like going forward. And we're just kind of sitting here with bated breath, trying to figure out which direction we head, over the next 2 weeks, 2 months, year and a half.
Right. I mean, to me, Angie, I don't have a lot of data on this, but it looks to me like beans are in a corrective mode here. And if we do get a dollar bottom, perhaps we get some type of pullback. Maybe, you do some type of retracement work. $12 would be a pretty good area, I would think, in beans. What do you think of that level? Do you have any levels that you're looking at for your people?
Yeah, for the most part, I spend a lot of my time trying to focus on where we should be sellers. And then obviously being aware of what we run into, what our risk is. And I said that once on Twitter, as a risk manager, my job is to figure out where things are going to go wrong and try to figure out how to avoid them, which isn't a fun place to be. So we were aggressive sellers once we rallied back up above that $14 plus. In old crop beans, the fundamentals have definitely shifted from where we were at the end of December. And so I could not argue with the idea that we would see some level of retracement. I think we do keep a risk premium in place from a fundamental standpoint in that $14 mark on the July. If that fails, then I definitely think front month we could see this thing start to slip back towards 12. We've got to guarantee what our production looks like. But one of the things that we really weren't anticipating when you saw the substantial run up in beans is the massive crop in Brazil making its way into the pipeline and what we saw there. So Brazil basically went from a super drought, which they went back into a drought, but managed somehow to produce a pretty monstrous soybean crop of around 5 billion bushel, which is larger than what the U.S. or close to where the U.S. is on a production standpoint. And so that's really impacted our ability to flow into the global market. So you've seen our exports basically go from feast to famine. We're barely meeting export pace. We've started to ration the demand back. And there's some large commercials out there that actually believe that we're underestimating how many soybeans are actually available in the pipeline. And so if we were to see, weather is what's going to trump all right now, because obviously and so we're going to see a level of support remain in this market until we get through about the middle part of July towards the tail end. Now, the rain is expected to come back in. We have been experiencing significant drought-like conditions across the bulk of the Corn Belt, especially for the last 2 weeks. Most areas are kind of experiencing their driest June on record. Now, agronomists will argue what that means for production. Most will say, if you're dealing with temperatures well into the 90s, close to 100 without any rain, you're obviously going to take the top end off yield. Like there's no avoiding that, but that doesn't mean we still can't produce a reasonably large crop. And so until then, we're going to definitely keep support underneath this thing. But if we were to get to where the weather, kind of turned relatively benign, if the rain does turn on here at the end of June and temperatures do cool off and we maintain that sort of pattern into the end of July or so, then yeah, this thing, Katie bar the door. There's really no reason, especially if Brazil is able to produce the 140 million metric ton crop folks are trying to project already for next year there.
Do you have a few meteorologists that you follow for long-term weather forecasts to kind of get a handle on them, and guys that you think are really good at doing this? And what are they saying? Look, out west we're in the frying pan right now. We have severe drought out here in the west. I don't know what it looks like in the grain belt, but is this a La Nina year or El Nino year? Is there anything out there that's going to give us a clue as to whether or not we have drought conditions continue into that July timeframe?
Yeah. Ed Valley with Empire Weather. So he's on Twitter. Ed Valley is his name, Vallee. For those of you that are searching for him, he's nailed it so far. This is the first year that I've really been working with him, and one of the biggest things, in agriculture, especially in the position that I'm in, is I need someone that's going to provide me with all of the data possible without any sort of bias. Right. I don't want someone to tell me what this weather may mean for a market, because that's my job, is to figure out what the weather means for the market. I don't need a meteorologist. You know what I mean? I don't go and tell him what the euro means for his forecast. And so Ed has by far been the best. He's calling on the grain belt to cool and stay relatively wet, above normal from a precipitation standpoint, as we work our way through into the month of July. Right now, he hasn't really indicated too much in the way of concern that we would see a long-term turn back to heat and dryness, but that's always a risk. Unfortunately, for those in the West, it does appear as though you're going to see that really large high pressure ridge work its way back towards the Rockies, which is only going to make things worse out west. From an overall, water temperature, La Nina, El Nino, I think right now we're kind of neutral. We're coming off La Nina. There's some concern, or there's some questions as to what we're looking at there. But going forward, it does appear as though throughout the summer that you're going to see a continuation of hot and dry conditions in the very far west, whereas in the grain belt, at least in the next 2 to 3 or 4 weeks here, it hopefully will turn to where we do turn wetter and cooler. Because I'm in team. We need as much production as we can get, especially for these farmers that maybe haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of higher prices. If you can kind of produce a larger crop, even if the board's off 50, 60, 70 cents from the high side of where it had traded, you're still going to be quite profitable as long as you have those extra bushels. And so at this point, Ed is saying that he was one of the very first to call it 2 weeks ago. He said to make sure that we were paying attention to what was going on around the 20th of June, that the tropical storm system, exactly, and that tends to bring in change. And so the tropical system in the Gulf doesn't look as though it's going to flow north into the Midwest, but that coming in has pushed the ridge of high pressure that we have been seeing sit over top of the southern plains and really working to bake that area of the northern plains. That's going to be pushed back to the west, and that's going to provide more in the way of northwest flow and some rainfall areas. And that's why you've seen the grain markets fall off as we have, over the last 2 days. Today, we're catching a bit of a bounce, which should be expected. There's only so much money you can take out of it before you actually see measurable rainfall. And we were at that point yesterday. The downside move was feeling tired from a short-term standpoint. And now we just have to see if it rains. If it does rain, then I would not be the least bit surprised to see us retest the downside of the recent move in corn, which was around $5 on the December board and around $6.50, $6.35 or so on the wheat board.
Okay, so wasn't there a trade from the CBOT, and I'm still in mourning that there's no trading floor anymore, Angie?
I know,
Can't
it's
even go
sad.
there and trade oats.
Oh, it was so much fun too. You
Oh
always
God.
knew when you first, when I first
Yeah.
started, like you'd call your brokers, and we were lucky enough to
Yeah.
have brokers on the floor. You knew
Yeah.
how busy the day was by how loud it was. And
Yeah.
so, and then it's so sad to think about because in 2014, my husband and I actually we were dating at the time, and he's in commodities as well. And we went down and actually stood in the wheat pit as the USDA report dropped. That's how much it
Yeah.
had changed from where it was to where it had been. And now I think it's
Yeah.
a driving
Bowl,
range or something, isn't it? I don't
bowling,
know.
bowling alley, I think.
Is it? Oh, it's
No,
so
I'm
sad.
guessing. Who knows what
I
they're
don't
turning
know.
it into?
Either way, it was always
Uh,
it was amazing,
I
and it's
feel
sad
fortunate
it's
I
not
was
there.
there during the golden age of open outcry. And,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
isn't there a strategy from, the old CBOT traders that they buy rain breaks?
Yeah. Yeah.
Buy the rain, buy the rain
yeah, you
break.
want to buy the rain. It's the whole sell the rumor, buy
Yeah,
the
it's
fact
like
sort of
earnings
deal,
for
or buy the
grains.
rumor, sell the fact. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like that's and so you tend to see the sell off on the forecast and the buyback on the reality. And so we'll see what all comes out of the expected rainfall. The GFS model has been incredibly wet as of late. The euro has been quite a bit drier, but there's some concern, and that's the thing in our industry. You spend a lot of time trying to figure out which weather model is accurate. And so the GFS had an upgrade in 2019, and that had been the less accurate model for the longest time. That one's been the more accurate model over the recent weeks here, mostly because the euro has been off so far, but they're actually moving the headquarters of where the euro model is running. So it's all kinds of weather drama too on top of everything else. And with how important production is this year, we're just that much more in tune or aware of every model run and what it's saying and where we're heading and all of these things. And yeah, it's
yeah.
definitely going to be a long hot summer.
I remember a couple of years ago you were saying that China was stockpiling wheat like there's no tomorrow. They must be pretty happy with that. I call it the Joseph strategy because that's what
Yeah.
Joseph did for the Egyptians. Are they still a big factor in the grain markets? What are they doing in here,
Huge.
the
Yeah,
Chinese?
they're a huge factor in the grain markets, just as in any other commodity market at this point in time. And so, yeah, I mean, what they're doing is leaves a lot. They're a mystery at this point. Now, obviously, a lot of folks will say, well, it's very obvious what China's doing. They've run themselves out of food during the trade war, and they have to correct that, and they're going to take in a bunch of stuff. And I agree. Obviously, that's the case. They've taken in a massive amount of beans. They've continued to ship a lot of beans out of Brazil. We'll have to see what it looks like for new crop demand here. They've been a little slow on the come when it comes to soybean imports, but on corn, they've been incredibly aggressive. They've taken a massive amount of corn. They're expected to continue to take a massive amount of corn. There are some concerns. There were a couple ships that sat with about 5.5, 6 million bushels of corn on them, for about 4 weeks, because there are some issues going on with their southern ports. They're battling some resurgence in COVID. There's a lot of
Yeah.
things that are really starting to come into question. And so overnight, we did see them kind of double down on the whole entire, you can't speculate in commodity markets idea that they've really been pushing. Supposedly, they're going to be auctioning off certain types of metals out of their government inventory or their government reserves. They're doing the same thing with corn. They're auctioning off about 37,000 tons of corn on Friday that had been imported in 2020 from the Ukraine. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, right now we're really kind of watching because they can buy a lot of bushels, and China's taught us this. It wasn't very long ago, 2012, when we had the drought year,
Yeah.
when prices started to go up, we had a bunch of corn exports that had been set up, and we were shipping a bunch of bushels over there. And suddenly they announced that they had discovered an unapproved genetic trait in corn, which was really something that had been being shipped over there for years and years prior. It wasn't something new. It wasn't something that they had known. It was just basically we had kind of this verbal agreement that these traits were okay and yada yada yada. Well, they found an unapproved trait and basically refused to unload any more ships. And so we were scrambling to try to figure out where where to take everything. And yeah, I mean, I still am holding my breath, until the boats unload and the check clears. I'm still a little bit nervous about what exactly the intent is of the Chinese, but because of that wheat stockpile, it has kind of offset some of their corn needs. We have seen their domestic corn prices start to fall off a touch, and so we're really going to be watching that whole thing.
So
We've
are
got
the
to.
Chinese are the Chinese still practicing that clean plate strategy with, it's less food than normal, almost like they're preparing for a soft famine. Is that still happening over there?
As far as I know, yeah. I mean, and that's my biggest concern. They were preparing for a soft famine, which people believe or act as though is very bullish long term to demand. And perhaps it is. My biggest worry is that they're preparing for some sort of physical conflict.
Okay. Yeah, they just
And
sent a bunch of the most aircraft, I think 27 planes into Taiwan
yeah.
airspace. I saw a tweet. Yeah, it's and President Biden got for the first time the Europeans to make a statement about the rise of China. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so you worry about that. What could be the flashpoint, and could Biden do any? Biden hasn't done anything about the tariffs that President Trump put on, has he?
Mm-hmm. No, nope. There's still a lot of talk that we're taking a look at what those look like. China says they want them to come off. And so nothing has changed there. The phase one trade
Yeah,
deal still remains in place, though. Are they lagging? Are they not? Does it matter? Personally, I don't think China's going to adhere to anything that doesn't fit for them. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
going to be very well figured on, are they in fact running out of supplies? Are they stocking up? You know what I mean? There's a big
yeah,
difference between running out and all of these things. And so it's definitely going to be an interesting where we end up in 2 to 5 years when it comes to our relationship with China and what that means for commodities as a whole.
yeah.
It's going to be fun, for lack of a better term. Maybe I have a warped sense of fun, but it's definitely going to be a challenge to see where we head and how we end up. And so that's really in my
Do
position
you worry
why.
about a long-term famine with everything that's going on, Angie? I
No,
mean, you hear a lot of people talking about it.
I
Famine.
do.
We've had plague, and
Mhm.
is the other horseman going to ride and have a
That's
famine, global
that's
famine?
always a concern. I mean, I don't think we can ignore the fact that the climate has become more volatile. We can
Yeah,
argue all until we're blue in the face as to what the cause is on that or what we can
yeah,
do to fix it. If we can fix it, as the human race. I mean, history would show that that's not necessarily the case. But I do feel as though we have seen more volatility come into play with the climate. I do wonder what some of this deforestation that you're seeing in Brazil when it comes to the
yeah,
rainforest, how that's going. There's a lot of Brazilian farmers down there that'll tell you that their grandpa, their father, whomever, said that they got their rain from the rainforest. And they'll
yeah,
argue that some of this deforestation that we're seeing under Bolsonaro and prior, is causing these droughts. And that's
yeah,
been the struggle that we've seen down there. Is they've had basically they still haven't replenished all of their necessary soil moisture, or their typical soil moisture that we had seen from the drought that was working through last summer and that late start to their rainy season. And we're going into the summer extremely, or into their winter, which tends to be dry or extremely dry as well. And so that's something that we're going to really want to have to pay attention to. What happens here in the US, what happens in South America, what happens in Russia, and so it's a whole different world too than where we were 16 years ago when the US was the breadbasket of the world. I mean,
right.
we're still large producers, but high prices have definitely provided incentive for other countries around the world to really develop and expand their
Yeah.
food production.
Angie, well, another great interview. I'm the ultimate contrarian. No, I'm looking for a mini ice age. So,
Yeah.
anyway, you see that as a possibility too?
Well, I have no idea,
Because
but
the
I'm
sun.
moving south if that's the case, because
All right,
I'm a summer gal through and
uh,
through, so
all
I
right,
can't do the ice age.
all right. Well, I
So
bought some new hockey skates. So,
yeah.
anyway, Angie, thank you so much, my trading warrior sister, for giving us insight into what's happening into a very complicated food, grain. I mean, meat prices are unbelievable.
Mhm.
You know, let me wrap it with could hacking that's gone on at meat producers also have an effect on grain producers? Could hackers come in and play games with supply as well?
You could see some of that. The one thing I can say that is decent about grain production and grain movement and some of that is it'll be inconvenient, and some of the newer generation may struggle for a while on how to manage it. But grain is relatively antiquated in the sense that a
Yeah,
lot of it is still managed hands-on.
yeah.
And so it wouldn't necessarily shut down the ability to take grain from point A to point B, though it may make
Okay.
it very difficult to track it. The further we get into technology, of course, the crazier it gets. The biggest
Yeah.
thing with the livestock, just to kind of say it, the biggest thing that's concerning to me about livestock is you basically have four major food meat processors that
Yeah.
each handle about 20% of the industry. And so
Right.
that's not the same on the grain side. And I will
Okay.
fight that level of consolidation until my dying day on the grain side. But
Okay.
yeah, for sure in livestock, it's definitely a concern.
Well, I'd rather have you as a friend than an adversary. So, anyway, great spirit, Angie. See, you are a warrior.
Thanks, sir. I
And
am. Thanks for
you
having
are.
me.
You're a grain warrior, and I really appreciate you being with us today. And I learn from you every time we have a conversation, Angie. Thank you
I
very much. I'm
appreciate it.
showing your website here with your blog, and
Yeah.
it's the business end of
Business end of
farming
farming. Yeah. And stay
dot com.
tuned. The end of the month, I'm making a pretty big transition away from where I am to where I'm heading. And so there'll be a lot more in the way of consulting, ability on the consulting side to be working with maybe some of these outside investors that want some access to what's actually happening, boots on the ground in
Oh, cool,
agriculture.
cool.
As well as a few other things. So definitely stay tuned over the next month or so for some exciting developments.
Okay, well, I hope that that is a great change for you, and that
Mhm.
pips rain down on you and your new husband, and everything new in your life, Angie. Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate it. Thanks for having me. We'll see you
All
again.
right, Angie Setzer, the goddess of grains. You got it, guys. So that's going to be a wrap, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Remember, don't just count your ears of corn or your pods of soybeans. Count your blessings, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Adios.